talk about a little bit about what is the difference between branding a public space versus a private space? And if you want to even talk about how we can brand two areas of the same building, because like for instance, a mall has a private space, which is the shop, and then you have the public space, which is the atrium and whatnot. So, like if you guys would like to weigh in on that, maybe Roshni, you can start with that. Public versus private.
Hmm.
How do you tell the stories, or how do you treat the areas differently?
I think with public, there's a much more bigger responsibility. With private, it's because it's been brief. You've been given a brief, right? Like private, the owner wants to talk about certain things, or once has a certain thing that he wants to highlight and talk about. But with public, it is like, like I said, it has to be a very balanced view. It is where a lot of people are going to come and have opinion, and it's a gift back to society in a way. So I think that way the approach is very, very different. In a private, it becomes much easier because you're just following a brief, and then you kind of say, okay, within this brief, let me not give you, yes, generally, so this is what happens. Generally, the brief I would get is, we want a cafe like Paris, okay, like a cafe in New York or Paris. Here's a mithai shop. And I said, okay, your brief is a cafe in Paris because you've seen the cafe in Paris. Can I reinterpret that brief saying, it means you want the level of a cafe in Paris, but you're okay with talking about mithais in that level, right? So how do we bring that international charm of a cafe in Paris, but talk about the Indian context of it? Bring it in the because many of these things haven't existed. So I think the job of a lot of us designers has been about asking them to take a leap of faith and kind of creating these new experiences. And I agree to a certain extent that we lie in chaos, but I think there's a need, just for the sake of communication, to clarify and clear up and make some very easy to understand brands and spaces, both privately and publicly. I don't know if that makes sense.
Roy, what about you? What's been your experience in branding private versus public spaces?
So I think,
and how do you treat them?
I think there are no branding of public spaces at all. I mean, public spaces branding typically in India, really don't exist. We don't have iconography for our famous monuments, for example, which is standardized and used across all of these places. Branding in private spaces, I'll agree with Roshni, is a lot simpler because you're working around a very defined context, a defined brief, and a defined purpose. But branding in public spaces, to me, really should be about the community and the place that is there, and it has to be able to sort of work around with it, whether it's through creating an identity, but it has to be able to give back to that community. And so the function of branding in that sense goes beyond sort of creating just a logo or a visual identity, etc. It also sort of starts to build an emotional connect with the people with it as well. In a private space, you can sort of, you can either create an emotional connect, or you can be esoteric and sort of do something quirky. You have a lot more opportunities and options as well. But in branding in public spaces, I think there's a lot more responsibility which is there, and therefore needs to be done a little bit more carefully.
So when we look at all these spaces, how do we create the emotional connect with that space? I mean, that is essentially the whole purpose of branding and placemaking, is to actually create that emotional connect. So what are some of the things that people can do to create that emotional connect?
So in my experience, one of the ways in which it has been is signage and wayfinding, interestingly, can play a tremendous amount of role, because it has, I think we desperately need a lot of signage in India, which guides people as well, because we are so used to just asking people for directions. But I think signage is a crucial component in most of our public spaces as well. And it can therefore also fulfill another function just beyond guiding people. It sort of starts imparting a character as well. The other is art programs. I think art programs have a tremendous, it's good to see a lot of public art programs in India now, but I think we have a long way to go, considering the kind of rich culture and heritage and the repository of talent that we have in India. I don't think we're doing anywhere close to enough to sort of, have them adequately represented, especially on this platform. Most of the art programs, etc., are, by, famous artists or, or someone from abroad. But I think we have a lot more talented people over here in India itself. Uh, the third program is really, I think it's food. And as Indians, we love food. And I think F&B,
Hmm.
food and beverage, plays a very, very important role in sort of, interestingly, to sort of impart a character to the place. Right. So, I mean, where Firdaus, where your office is, right? I mean, you
Hmm.
literally can map out Bombay according to, the kind of chai
Yeah.
walas there and the kind of food that you get on the street. And that's a different kind of mapping altogether.
Very
Uh,
true.
and the other is festivals, and we love to celebrate. So I think festivals and that sort of programming also imparts a huge character. So if public places are built in a manner of way in which people are able to use it for community celebrations, it automatically would create an emotional connect. I mean, that's a very, very simple hack, I would assume. So if you're building a park, let's not build it in a way which is, manicured and, keep off the grass and do this and that as well. But design it in a
Hmm.
way that, every community can come and celebrate its own festival over here.
And Roshni, what about you? What are some of the ways that you bring the emotional connect into that space?
So what I mean, I think Sarah's covered a lot of ground there. One thing I mean, I think more than the emotion, like Sarah is more about bringing the community and emotional connect, and I agree completely with that. But there's also, I feel there's a giant gap right now in public policy and and the reality of what's happening, because
Hmm.
simple things like in if you see in South Bombay, Rampart Row, the reason why it looks a certain way it currently does. And I always used to wonder कि how abroad में कैसे ऐसा अच्छा लगता है सबको जहाँ पे क्यों नहीं होता है, right? Like I'm like,
Right,
how is,
right,
it's not like they are some great, even the people, there are eh, uneducated people even there. There are people who are poor, there are, beggars, everything. There's poverty and everything everywhere. And I then realized that there are councils in the government, there are design councils whose only job, and every area has a design council whose job is to make sure that the aesthetic of that area remains. That means you can't put West Side ka logo on an old heritage building. You cannot put that
right.
Bank of Baroda cannot pull up the whole building with that kind of they do
Hmm.
create branding. There are rules, and those rules, and that's real place branding, I would say, because that goes into practicality of how to actually roll things out, because no matter what you do, there will always
Right,
be a commercial side of things, but somebody has to stand there and say this is approved, that is not approved, as simple as that. And that doesn't mean you don't have commerce, you don't have malls, you don't have
right,
international
right.
brand, but there has to be somebody taking those decisions, which is why same thing with signage systems in India, right? Like that, if you look at the signages in I mean, I'm speaking very Bombay centric, but I'm sure, I mean, I know it's true everywhere else.
Right.
You'll be in Ghatkopar or you'll be in like Kandivali, and it will say straight ahead for Mantralaya, and I'm like, Mantralaya
Yeah.
is not even in this ballpark, right? And
Right,
it's the
right.
packages are completely there just for, I don't know why. Maybe somebody paid the road guy, so they 100 signages banana hai to bana diya. There was no
Yeah.
thought, nothing.
Very true.
So I think for us, I mean, definitely the public stuff should happen, and I think a lot of private sector is doing that. A lot of restaurants, a lot of great festivals and art festivals, and those things are already happening, and people are really trying. But I think until the government or people in the tourism board or whatever really pushes back and says, listen, we are saying incredible India, but when people are coming to India, they're not seeing anything incredible here. So how do we bridge that gap, right? There are old plaques where there are beautiful pura history likha hai वगैरह. This was
Hmm.
opened by Jamshedji Tata, whatever. Niche there's a lady sitting and selling her whatever flowers, and she spat on that and she's hung her stuff on that plaque. It's gone. Like, so I think huge conversations about also maintenance,
Right.
emotional connect, yes, but I think emotional connect is also, people should feel that emotional connect with these spaces, and I think that will come if we give it respect and rules are created, and if the government or the sort of authorities kind of treat it as sacrosanct. And I think especially I feel like in
So,
Gujarat
so
they've
let's go a little bit deeper into this in the sense
Hmm.
that now I think you've named a number of things that could potentially make a place iconic. Like you've listed out a lot of things that should be done. Could you guys maybe talk about, like, okay, if a place has to be considered iconic, what are all those things that we need to have happen in that space to make it iconic?
I think
And maybe you
exactly
guys
what
could
I'm hoping
take
here.
You could probably take any example, like, Saurav, if you talk about the VR mall, that would be one great case study of how you made that place iconic for Surat. I mean, I know that it's brought about a huge revival in Surat's fortunes. A lot of people love it. They say this is the place where we're just gonna go hang out all the time. And maybe Roshni, you could pick an example of yours where you managed to really transform a space and make that kind of iconic in your own way. Roy, if you want to go first, that would be great.
So I think the first recipe, the ingredient for something being iconic is originality. I think, as a process, if, sort of everyone is geared towards, let's create something which is truly original and sort of depicts us or the place or its context, I think that sort of works really well. And a lot of it, apart from obviously, I really see that design is one small part of it. It obviously, to build something into iconic requires a huge amount of work by a huge bunch of people. So the process then also sort of becomes really important, that how do you sort of do a process? And to me, really sort of placemaking in that sense, sort of really when I first learned of the word and, the entire aspect of placemaking as well, and this was quite some time back, around almost 10 years ago. To me, really, placemaking sort of gave a cue about an interesting kind of process which ties down right at the project conceptualization level to the execution, delivery, and activation as well. And that to me is sort of, the importance of placemaking. That there's one singular thread which makes sure that when something is being thought of, it's been thought of in the right way, and it's also delivered and activated in the right way as well. And all of this then sort of contributes to helping build something, sort of truly iconic. And I think all of these places, whether it's Surat, and there are so many different examples also across India as well, where there's a tremendous amount of work which is happening as well. But given obviously the size of our country and the kind of place that we have, there is a lot to do. But I think it also means there's tremendous amounts of opportunities for everyone as well.
Super. Roshni, what about you? Can you tell us a little bit about some place that you made iconic using various elements? And it'll be really interesting to hear that.
Yeah, I think what is especially in India, I think iconic is a few things that make something iconic, right? Either it's the food of a place, right? That one more thing. Okay, Surat ka ye important, Kanpur ka ye yaad hai, or it's like craftsmanship, right? There is Kanjivaram saris, or this from Calicut, or the boat race. So and I think all its events like festivals, so I think nobody can really deliberately make something iconic, but you can keep hitting that arrow there. I completely agree with Saurabh that it has to be something authentic, like original and authentic. Right. If you do something authentic, which is like only you can do it there, right? Only your Patan can make your the Patan saris, right? If you can keep those centers and sort of help them really not general, not make it generic, right? So the patola coming, and there is a whole history. There's a king who used to, there's all of that. Now to take that storytelling, then take take the craftsmen, bring them to a place which is beautiful, which is celebrating all the patola saris, have a museum, get them there, then get people to come and visit it. You do all of these things, have people to come and easily consume it, maybe create a festival around it, maybe create a time of the year that you can get the best patola saris, whatever. You kind of narrow it down to make it, make it celebrated. And I think that can make something iconic, because there's so many such things around India that you can just have it in a season. Like there's certain even vegetables. Like there's something called pork that you get in Surat, which only there in this month, right? And they have pork, like pork parties, which is so interesting. Now, suppose you get pork all throughout the year, that magic will go away. You get strawberries in Mahabaleshwar a certain time. So now, how do you make that strawberry culture iconic? That's what Mapro does, right? Mapro during February has that whole thing, and now it's become iconic. So it's about taking, specific things.